ladies and gentlemen, the globalists aren't free market. They admit it's not meant to have a good, vibrant economy. Everything is to consolidate power in their hands, and that's what they set up with tax incentives to move overseas, then all these environmental rules and taxes on companies that stay here so they can't stay in business, and regulations on mining and timber and everything else. It is designed as a form of mercantilism. For those that don't know, under the old French system adopted by the British of mercantilism, they would only allow their holdings or their colonial slave empires to develop raw materials, and then they would take back goods to the mother country that they controlled to have the value-added goods or durable goods or manufactured items. And they stated on record, in their parliaments and in their palaces, this is all part of history for those that don't know, and Bob would like to speak to this, that it was done to keep control over the slave grids. Well, now this mercantilism, they move the factories to slave countries where the people are too poor to ever get any of the products, to ever do business back with another nation, and it's meant to vertically integrate. This is not a free market. This is the private banks financing the criminal consolidation so they can bankrupt and get everybody dependent on government to then carry out the eugenics operation.
And on top of that, most people don't realize that the profits that are being made by these transnational conglomerates are going to offshore locations like the Cayman Islands. And if they don't repatriate the capital, they pay about a 2% tax. Now, back 4 years ago, there was legislation, and the legislation said that these offshore corporations could bring their money back if they chose, but that was to create jobs. Well, they got the legislation. Jobs were never created. They moved $350 billion back into the United States at not a 35% tax rate, but a 5.25% tax rate. And now they have $700 billion offshore. They want to bring that back in. They haven't said anything about a tax rate, but I'm sure they're going to try to get the same kind of deal. And all this is subsidization of the rich.
That's right. They call it getting rid of tax shelters, but really it's just like the tax-free foundations in 1906 was billed as a way to defeat the robber barons. It really made their money private, go into these foundations so that it was completely protected and couldn't be investigated. And they used that to further consolidate their power through the Carnegie Endowment, the Rockefeller Endowment, and others. And, of course, they were all eugenicists at the time, and their sons are now in control now, the elderly David Rockefeller and others. And so it's still the same mindset, still the same program. Bob Chapman, getting back to Mr. Von Brunn in this shooting and H.R. 1207, 225 sponsors now going to the floor in the next week or so. And the COINTELPRO operation from the establishment, I've noticed the last few years when this has been building, is, they just want to audit the Fed so they can set up a new Bank of the World, destroy the Fed, and set up a new Bank of the World. No, if you audit the Fed, it is a tentacle or a proboscis, a suction vehicle to the big Anglo-American / European banking complex. I want your take on this when we get back, Bob, your analysis with Bob Chapman. And so if you break open the door of the bankers, you show the crime of private central banking and the fraud, it then brings down the whole system. So it's part and parcel. It's like an arm of the New World Order. So they're saying, don't investigate the arm because then you'll put the rest of the body in control. Certainly if we start beating them, they're going to try to spin it into that. But that's not what's happening here. And so despite the fact that people inside our movement with the government op tried to stop what we were doing, we're marching forward. And even if this fails and they have a little fake celebration, it is going to be short-lived because now the people irrevocably know who the enemy is, the private Federal Reserve, and the few that don't know are now learning. We are on the edge of truly engaging the enemy toe-to-toe. Going back to Bob Chapman. Bob, specifically, the point I'm making, and I want your view on this, is it's all coming to a head. We're having this incredible victory. We have to recognize we have power. We have to recognize we have destiny. We have to believe it and image it and move forward knowing we're right and knowing we don't have a choice. We are under scientific bondage of a group of private offshore banks that have engaged in a corporate takeover of the U.S. They probably would have gotten away with it, but they're so greedy that they're looting and stealing everything, thinking Homeland Security and Northcom can protect them in it. They plan to bring us into a greater crisis so they can have a clampdown. We have their own documents. But now we're fighting back. Ron Paul's risking his life. We've supported him. The people have called for months by the thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands to Washington on record. We've now up at 225. It's going to go to the floor. It's got a good chance of passing. And even if it doesn't, people are going to have to defend why this group's above the law, why they can't be investigated. And Congress separately, as you know, Bob, is now subpoenaing the Fed, saying, you will tell us where the Bank of America money went. You will tell us where the billions went. You will tell us where the $300 billion went on that. You will tell us why you ordered the CEO to buy another bank that was healthy. You will tell us. Well, because there's stockholders, the Rockefellers and others over Bank of America, they're getting the profit. It's always about the CEOs, but the CEOs, Bob, aren't they literally like the pirate sent out by the pirate king? And he gets flayed alive if he doesn't do what he's told? I mean, aren't these CEOs just diversions from the real power?
Yes, we might call them the mercenaries. And that's exactly what they are. And it's like the presidents that we get for the country. They're simply mercenaries that do what they're told to do. But harking back to what you spoke of just before the break, this piece of legislation, which I think will pass in the House, is probably the biggest thing that's happened to bring the American people together and to attack the real problem, the underlying problem with our economic and financial being, and that is the Federal Reserve. And you alluded to this before, and, of course, for the British, the Bank of England. That is another private organization upon which the Federal Reserve was modeled. And we're getting the word out. We're making people understand who is doing it to them, who is robbing them, who is corrupt. It's the guys in the $4,000, $3,000 suits. That's who it is. And
what does G.I. Joe say? What does G.I. Joe say? Knowing is half the battle. We are now identifying the enemy, identifying the illegitimate criminals, and once we've educated the public, we win. That's why they're going to have to stage events and say it's anti-Semitic to not want the Federal Reserve, and they're going to make it racial and religious and inject that into the middle of it.
And it's not going to work. It just isn't going to work, and that was foolish of them to do that, but that's okay. If that's what they want to do, that's fine. As you say, we're going toe-to-toe and head-to-head, the right thing at the right time, and, you know, Congressman McFadden would have been successful if they hadn't murdered him. And so this time, we're really going to take a shot at him, because it's not only Ron Paul, there's all of these people surrounding him, Americans of all stripes, so to speak, politically and otherwise. America's coming together, like Anthony J. Hilder and I discussed in this program before. He and I have been fighting for years to make this happen, and it's happening, brought together by economic and financial events.
Bob, it's got to feel good to you, to the sacrifices, the attacks. You've even been driven out of this country by these criminals. You know, your choice, you could operate and not be stopped by them because they're scared of you. It's got to feel good, though, to see we've come this far and to feel the momentum shifting.
You can feel it and smell it. They're terrified that the world is going to find out what they're doing. And every morning when we start at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning doing the emails, they're in from Australia and Malaysia and Japan, and we make the gamut. They start coming in from Latvia, Kazakhstan, and so on and so forth. People are listening to these programs all over the world, and we are drilling these people.
That's right, and we can't be stopped because, Bob, you and I and all the rest of us that are committed, like you said, we're not turning back. Point of no return. We can't be stopped. If God be with us, who can stand against us? Bob Chapman, stay there. Call straight ahead, 1-800-259-9231 for Bob Chapman. We'll talk more about what's happening in the economy when we get back.